Landscape of the Now, Topography of Movement Improvisation. Well, it was, it's an extension of coming on a quarter century now, really, of sort of deep looking into improvisation. This particular project took 10 years from its sort of instigation to the actual publication, which, yeah, the book just came out 2 weeks ago from Oxford University Press. Going back into the 90s, I sort of started my looking into improvisation with this. My first one was with Trisha Brown, and then Steve Paxton, Simone Forti, Steve Krieghaus, and some other people. And that developed into a project that I finished in the 90s. And then about 10 years ago, I thought, well, I wonder what has changed. I wonder where things have gone since those early 90s interviews that I did. And so I went back to some of the people that I had spoken with, starting with Simone Forti. And she and I had taught at UCLA together in the meantime, and she had moved to LA from Madbrook, and I had moved around, and a lot had happened for us. And so we sat down and talked again, you know, just that kind of touching base about what had changed for her and what was she thinking about now. And it's really stimulated me thinking, I really need to go back and talk to all these people again. Wow. And add a couple of extra ones. And so over the course of about 4 years, whenever I could sneak away, I would go to interview someone, always intentionally in their home space, because I wanted them to feel really comfortable. So I would, when I would go there, I would ask them to sit down, you know, where they would normally sit, you know, in their house when they were really, you know, talking or thinking about something. And that was the beginning of the project. A number of questions came out of the end of my project in the 90s. I mean, it sort of started with a simple question, which was, how does improvisation work? And came out with a series of complex questions or sort of subject matter that different people had talked about, that it was clear that people were experiencing and working with. But I didn't have answers. The end of that project was a series of questions. And so this project really started where that one ended, which was I went with those questions to these people and said, well, what about this? What about the audience-improviser relationship? What about spirituality or the transpersonal? You know, to really sort of dig further and deeper into the ideas that I knew they were working with from the previous project. And the book, it could have been focused on them as people, because, you know, you're talking about Nancy Stark Smith and Ruth Sapora and Lisa Nelson and these amazing personalities. Yeah. But really, I was interested much more in the process of improvisation. Yeah. So the questions became the focus rather than the people. Yeah. So that I asked everybody the same set of questions so that I could take 8 answers and my own take on that same subject and compare them side by side until you started to see, wow, some things are really similar here and some things are radically different. Yeah. It came out of a process in my study in the 90s of actually recording people talking about their improvisational experience while they were improvising.
That's the one about an article that is published in the Taken by Surprise, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, you know, it's kind of intrusive, obviously, but I was using very experienced improvisers, and, you know, so they would be working alone in a studio and they would hear my voice say, you know, what are you experiencing now? They would just, whatever they were feeling, talking, thinking about, what they were moving with, they would just say it. And so I just started to catalog those things and then compare them, you know, by having 2 or 3 improvisers come together and talk about it. Say, you know, so and so was really working with this idea. Is that something you work with? And it was always interesting to hear somebody say, oh yes, I think about that all the time, or no, I don't think about that at all. I wouldn't do that on a bet. And so it's fascinating to see how something crucial to one improviser is not even improvisation to somebody else. Well, the book is divided into what emerged from talking with everybody, which is that there were issues that they were dealing with, and that there were resources that they were drawing. And the issues are questions like the audience improviser relationship. You know, it's very different when you're alone in the studio moving to when you're standing in front of 500 people moving in performance. Why is it different? How is it different? What do you notice? How does that affect you? So, you know, these issues. What is good? How do you decide at the end of an improvisation that was a good improvisation or a bad improvisation? Or do you even think about the question of whether it was good or not? You know, and so looking at those ideas, the tracking is another one for me, where you know, experienced improvisers have this sense of where they've been, but I don't think they consciously are sitting around thinking, you know, well, what did I do 5 minutes ago, and can I use that again? And yet it emerges. You know, I've been in a 30-minute improvisation with somebody, and moved on from an idea, and then suddenly it reemerges, you know, unbidden. So somehow myself and my partner were thinking, experiencing, remembering something that came before, and there it is again. How does that happen? So I was really looking at issues like that, and then just the basic resources that we're working with: body, movement, the senses, space, time, and the imagination, memory. How do they function, and how do people use them or not use them?
I always remember like what Ruth Sapora, I think she told me in the interview, but in one interview that I did with her 4 years ago, or in the book, it's just like, we always dance between memory, environment, and imagination. You know, so of course in environment then is all the perceptual and sensation realms, and because that's one of the things that is also my question for you is, why do you think, I try to ask myself this question very often, why do you think improvisation is interesting or relevant to understand it? Because it can be really kind of say, oh, that's improvised, you know, but in the level of humanness, perhaps there is something there.
There's definitely something there. I'm actually working on a new essay for a compilation that's being put together by Oxford, and I'm looking at that very question. You know, like why have choreographers, you know, in that sort of old style choreographer idea over the course of the last 30 years or whatever, incorporated more and more live moments, improvised moments, you know, both in process and in performance. What are they looking for? And I think, you know, certainly one of the issues for me, and there's a quote from a scholar who was actually writing about like English literature from the 1800s or something, but he used the term improvised subjectivity. And, you know, the idea of seeing in real time somebody negotiate the world around them. What does it mean to them? What are they experiencing? Why are they making decisions? You know, it's very different, I think, for an audience to look at something that has been pre-created and then just performed in front of them, versus realizing that they are seeing that negotiation happen right now. And I think that brings the humanness of the performers more to the fore.
And I've been here in Impulse Dance, and we have here Alva Noe, that is a philosopher of mind, and he's kind of teaching this class on perception and organized activity, and it has been kind of really interesting. Then how, of course, he had experiences with Lisa Nelson, then, and we actually had conversation for a long time ago, and then how he's in the dance context, bringing a lot of things that had been explored in the dance world from kind of mostly through the lineage of Judson and Grand Union, through a lot of this, what I call this kind of phenomenological praxis, and
Yep.
then it's literally he's learning a lot. He's like he loves to be surrounded by all these inquiring minds, but then I wonder, it's like what is actually important about this moment of certain kind of awareness of. I call it like there is this moment of this cognitive turn again in relationship to the practices.
Well, and I think that we have, in a way, through physical practice, blown the doors open about cognition to some degree. Both mindfulness practice that's happened out there, contemplative practices, and improvisational practices have opened out. Cognition is not the computer in your brain. No, it's this interactivity with through your physicality into the world around you, and suddenly they're looking at brain in a different way because they see it in play, in practice, in improvisers, and so they get excited in seeing phenomenology played out in front of them. As an inspiration for choice making and all of that, as opposed to just an intellectual exercise.
Exactly. That is what exactly. Then the philosopher is sitting there, distilling and clarifying a lot of the terminology, and then at the same time putting into play certain things to illustrate. And I found that fascinating, what is actually going on right now, and extremely relevant, that a philosopher is in a dance festival, actually. And then going back to your book, then in this last book, can you say that you found commonalities? Can you unpack something for us, like something that you found, perhaps, that it was either surprising or new for you?
One of the things I think I knew, but the book really brought out, that the study really brought out, is that the set of resources and issues that any one improviser is working with they're not all the same by any means. So that some things that literally are fundamental to one person. I'm thinking of say Lisa Nelson and the work that she does around sensing and the physicality of sensing and all of that. You can ask another fully experienced improviser, and they'll say, "Don't do it. Don't think about it. Don't want to think about it." And so, that's one of the things, is that because there's so many resources, so many categories, so much information that we can take in, where you put your focus is a very individual thing. And that's part of the magic of it.
Yeah. And don't you think, this is like my pet theory, I have noticed that this phenomenon happens is with the oldies, meaning with Steve, kind of the 15 to people that you can say that open a lineage, but there is something about the big crowd that tag along with a lot of the research of because they study the tuning scores, or they study contact, but this, but what I have noticed is like this kind of pioneers, and I like to put it that way, this initiators of the deconstruction and the thinking, they have kept researching for a really long time, and then they have kept going deeper and deeper in their own research. But what I mean is, then you can find that they have differentiated each other almost if they have decided, this is I have not heard this, but it's, oh, Steve is doing this, I will do this, you know.
Uh,
So practically they have chosen, you know, parts of the elephant, you know.
that's a great metaphor.
Yeah, and then each one is, but it's also knowing, oh, I know that she is studying this, so I'm choosing, and so it's in this kind of bouncing each other of a community of knowledge that they are building certain kind of elephant-like
Yep.
figure. Anyways,
And-
it's
yeah,
something like that.
and that very reason is, and that very thing that you've observed is the reason that I have always approached my research as a construction.
Hmm.
That 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 to get a larger picture, you really have to talk to a lot of people. You know,
Yeah.
you have to see the full range of investigations that people are doing out there, and there is a generational difference.
Mm.
You know, that the pioneers, as you're talking about, or that Judson generation and where they've gone, you know, I think that their concerns are slightly different than the following generation of people. Um, Maybe that's the book after the one I'm working on now or something. But, you know,
Yeah.
I think it'd be interesting to see, okay, well, what's been abandoned and what's been picked up and what new has been added in some way.
Yeah, like I have this question that it perhaps is a little bit peripheral, but it's in relationship to the connection of something that I see obvious, like in my face, of in relation the relationship of improvisational practices of this generation with certain knowledge trade, with information theory or the technology, the cyber culture of the times, the 9 evenings. I don't know. There is something for me was intuitively I can also see it kind of historically. There was this interesting confluence. Then I always feel like improvisational you know, techniques or are more related to digital technologies. That's what a lot of people wants to think about right now.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting to me because, you know, the contact improvisation stream of improvisational investigation was so bodily, you know, it was so senses and nerves and, you know, all of that side of things. But I think you're right that there has been another side stream that in the sort of latter generation has become more has come more to the forefront, that deals with connectivity and technology and distance, you know, and it a lot of my own performance work in the last 10 years is built around that, because I've been designing technology-based improvisational environments in which then I perform.
Yeah.
Because it allows me to complicate my life as an improviser in a way that I want to happen.
Yeah.
You know, once you've been improvising for a long time, you come sadly face to face with a lot of your habits and your typical choices and all of that. And I've been able to use digital technologies to disrupt that.
Exactly.
You know, or in the colloquial way that I put it, the environment comes back to bite me in the butt. When I'm inside of it, I have to deal with it. And so it's a different way of it's a disrupted and disjointed way of dealing with things, which is quite different than the I'm improvising inside of my body and sensing myself kind of. One of the things that's made a big difference in my ability to conduct the research at all has been that I have to stay in practice inside of it. I think one of the places that we've run into trouble in the past has been, you know, the separation of research and practice. And so, and I think all of the, you know, all generations of people who have looked deeply into improvisation, I've seen a lot of curiosity, you know, that goes beyond themselves. And I think that in itself is a kind of research. You're both looking into what you do and looking at the people around you that you might improvise with or see in a performance or meet at a festival, and being able to step back and say, oh, well, that's really interesting. What would that be like? And so the investigation happens both in a formal way and in a physical way. And I think that's crucial to how I situate myself inside of looking into what's happening in improvisation at the moment. Is I have to be doing it. I love theoretical models, plural. And I think that's been the sort of third track: my embodied practice, my ethnographic practice, research, and then this connecting with science. Connecting with science is, this idea that there are many fields of science out there that are trying to understand behavior, animal behavior, insect behavior, human behavior. They're looking at all of these ways, or systems, looking at systems theory, looking at complexity, looking at all of those things. Every time I grab one of those, I learn something about improvisational practice. And I think it's important in a way to avoid really meta theory. Because every time meta theory seems to appear, it gets debunked instantly by some other meta theory. I'm more interested in rooting around, pig-like, searching for interesting things. To say, if I'm looking at, like I'm looking at stigmergy, and I'm, been doing some writing on that, and the traces that we leave as movers inside of the spaces that we embody that are still there to be sensed by people who follow after. As improvisers, we live inside of that. We feel it. You don't have to have seen what happened in the space to sense it. That's another little, bon mot of science out there that just a few people are looking at, but that we grab, apply to improvisation, learn some stuff, and discard and move on. I think that's really the theory that I'm interested in, as opposed to trying to make it all fit. In some massive theory.
And then
I think for me, improvisation has a real importance, and we've seen it emerge more over the course, as technology has invaded or connected to our lives, as things have become more disjointed and all of that socially, as we've come more face to face with difference because of the globalism, all of that. Improvisation is a practice of navigating complexity and allowing yourself both to pursue intention, but to embrace, change at the same time. And that's the world in which we find ourselves at the moment. So, improvisation is a survival tactic. And becoming more aware of how we work inside of it allows us to navigate more effectively, I think. And that's why, we've seen more books, more interest, more research. That's because we need it right now.
Yeah, there is a theorist, Lucy Suchman, actually, that she talks about plans and situated actions. I just feel like I love that almost paradoxical and oxymoronic way of talking about, okay, we are embodied and situated, and we plan, and we have actions, and then of course you are expanding the metaphor in relationship to life and survival. It's like, what is then our possibility, or how are the strategies to facing change and to have certain degree of agency and control, right? So that's and then what's now?
Well, I am, as I had said to you prior to this, I'm working on a new essay for a book, upcoming book, just a chapter in a compilation, trying to document a little more clearly the use of improvisation in performance in works that are looked at as choreographies. I mean, we all know that contemporary choreographers are incorporating more and more improvisational practices and moments inside of works that may have set parts, all of that. We know it's happening, but researchers haven't done a very effective job yet of diagnosing the issues there. I mean, like, why is that? Why did they give up the control model and start distributing, more liveness inside? So I'm trying to document some of that by talking to people who are seen primarily as choreographers, and ask them about how and why they use improvisation. When do you imbue that into a piece that really is mostly set? So I'm trying to get a better handle on that. And then my next project, I'm starting to compile some of my older essays and bring them together with some new writing that I've been working on that's more my own musings rather than looking at like this project was mostly about what these people are doing and how they're approaching it. But the coming compilation of essays is really more about my own writings.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. And, a lot of things that I feel that we can keep going. And as I told you, we will include this resource, this conversation as a resource in Meta Academy. And we hope to have you back and continue this conversation.
Great. Thank you so much, Marlon.
Yep.
And Lisa Nelson and these amazing personalities. But really, I was interested much more in the process of improvisation. So the questions became the focus rather than the people. So that I asked everybody the same set of questions so that I could take 8 answers and my own take on that same subject and compare them side by side until you started to see, wow, some things are really similar here and some things are radically different. It came out of a process in my study in the 90s of actually recording people talking about their improvisational experience while they were improvising.
That's about an article that is published in the
How does improvisation work? And came out with a series of complex questions or sort of subject matter that different people had talked about, that it was clear that people were experiencing and working with. But I didn't have answers. The end of that project was a series of questions. And so this project really started where that one ended, which was I went with those questions to these people and said, well, what about this? What about the audience-improviser relationship? What about spirituality or the transpersonal? To really sort of dig further and deeper into the ideas that I knew they were working with from the previous project. And the book, it could have been focused on them as people because, you're talking about Nancy Stark Smith and Ruth Sapora. Stimulated me thinking, I really need to go back and talk to all these people again.
Wow.
And add a couple of extra ones. And so over the course of about 4 years, whenever I could sneak away, I would go to interview someone, always intentionally in their home space, because I wanted them to feel really comfortable. So when I would go there, I would ask them to sit down, where they would normally sit, in their house when they were really, talking or thinking about something. And that was the beginning of the project. A number of questions came out of the end of my project in the 90s. I mean, it sort of started with a simple question, which was, and some other people, and that developed into a project that I finished in the 90s. And then about 10 years ago, I thought, well, I wonder what has changed. I wonder where things have gone since those early 90s interviews that I did. And so I went back to some of the people that I had spoken with, starting with Simone Forti, And she and I had taught at UCLA together in the meantime, and she had moved to LA from Madbrook, and I had moved around, and a lot had happened for us. And so we sat down and talked again, just that kind of touching base about what had changed for her and what was she thinking about now. And it's really stimulates landscape of the now, topography of movement improvisation. Well, it was, it's an extension of coming on a quarter century now, really, of sort of deep looking into improvisation. This particular project took 10 years from its sort of instigation to the actual publication, which, the book just came out 2 weeks ago from Oxford University Press. Going back into the 90s, I sort of started my looking into improvisation with this. My first one was with Trisha Brown, and then Steve Paxton, Simone Forti, Steve Krieghaus,